And what about just gaining that kind of support from the customers? Because within 6 months after launch, you got 1 million subscribers. 2 months after, it was 1.5 million. So I think for anyone with a new idea to get any amount of subscribers, let alone 1 million, is huge. So what did you do? Like, what was the game plan?
Well, I'll tell you, the game plan that we started with completely failed, right? Because we thought initially, okay, well, if a typical satellite TV subscription is 100 ringgit a month, imagine if we only offered 10 ringgit a month. Surely we'll get a lot of people. Turns out, next to nothing. Only my own friends and family members that I kind of forced them to subscribe to iFlix. So initially, hardly any take up. Right? And then you have to now problem solve it. What could be the problems? Maybe it can't be price point. Maybe it's the payment channels, right? Maybe people don't find it convenient to use a credit card or online banking. Okay, what are they familiar with? So back in 2015, the number one payment channel for e-commerce, for example, e-commerce was growing very fast, was cash on delivery, right? Because this is all before e-wallets and all of that, right? And cash on delivery, how does that work with iFlix? So we had to experiment. We said, okay, at the end of your 30-day free trial, we will send a guy on a motorcycle to your home to collect your 10 ringgit. It costs us more than 10 ringgit to pay the guy on the motorcycle to go, but we did it anyway because we needed to learn. And you know what we learned? They still didn't want to pay. So, okay, well, if that doesn't work, then what else, right? And just so happened someone came up to me and said, hey, look, thank you for launching iFlix. I'm a big fan. I watch it 2 or 3 hours a day. I'm on my 4th free trial. So so they like watching iFlix. They just hate the idea of paying for it. So no matter what payment channels we put in, they wouldn't have paid for it. So that's where we then had to broaden the problem and think, okay, well, if the end user doesn't want to pay for iFlix, but they do like watching it, so who will benefit if more people watch iFlix? Now, most people think advertisers. But what I can tell you is, like, if I have to stuff you with ads, you're going to run away from the platform, right? Because now it's going to be annoying. Instead, we said, well, actually, telecom companies would really love it if people watch iFlix because they were going through this like change in business model where 50% of their revenues, voice calls, SMS, were disappearing and only data revenues were growing. And video is the most data intensive application, right? 70% of all data bandwidth on the internet is video. So if we gave video applications for free, they will want to use up a lot more data. And so that became the model, which was convincing telcos to buy iFlix subscriptions from us and give it to their subscribers for free to stimulate more data usage. And in the end, buying more data at a higher price than they're paying for iFlix. And of course, when you work with telcos, they've got millions and millions of customers. So it became a much faster way of rolling out than us trying to spend money on Google and Facebook ads and convincing people to download iFlix one at a time and then convincing them to pay us 10 ringgit a month. That would have taken forever.
I mean, I just thought it was brilliant the way that you bundle it. It's sort of like in AirAsia, you bundle it, your offers with hotels, and now in Naluri as well, you bundle it with your other companies like insurance companies. And in all of that, right, why was rapid expansion such a huge, huge priority?
I think because the reality in this world is if you remain small, you're going to get crushed. And mainly because the businesses that I chose to compete in, right, airlines or entertainment or healthcare, these are big budget industries where scale matters. So while you might be able to start small, you're not going to last for a long time being small. So you got to fight for scale. And that's why being able to move fast is crucial.
So in 2015, you end up going to San Francisco to visit some old Stanford mates, and you end up learning about Omaha Health. Can you share a bit about that?
Well, so again, full circle in life, right? We started talking about Ultimate Frisbee. And one of my Ultimate Frisbee team members was a co-founder of a company in San Francisco called Omaha Health. And we went there for an Ultimate Frisbee team reunion. I caught up with him and he was telling me about his business. I was like, it's very similar to what I do. I'm using digital marketing to get people addicted to mindless TV entertainment. And he's using the same digital marketing to get people addicted to a healthier lifestyle. That's kind of more cool, right? But also because they were very focused on diabetes. And it really connected with me on a personal level because 10 years ago, I lost my own father to diabetes. So that kind of opened my eyes in terms of how digital can actually really positively impact people's lives. Because the other thing also, unfortunately, coming from Malaysia is we are the #1 most unhealthy country in Asia. right, in terms of our rate of obesity and diabetes. So that got me like really fired up. And I said, okay, well, maybe I want to do something like Omada Health for Southeast Asia, because again, when we started iFlix, everybody wrote us off, or at least 115 investors wrote us off because they said there's already a global giant called Netflix. But we showed that if you create something local, relevant for the mass market, there will always be space. So same thing, right? Like Omada is great, but Omada is not tailored to the Malaysian consumers, the Indonesian consumers, the Thai consumers, the Filipino consumers. So there's an opportunity.
Were you thinking about this immediately after seeing Omada? Because you went in 2015, you launched in 2017. So that's a 2-year.
Of course, sometimes things percolate, right? The seed is planted. But I think the catalyst to me was in 2017. I mean, it was tough, right? Because, we went through some challenging periods, kind of trying to keep the company afloat, had to even like retrench staff and, trying to just survive. But ultimately we like suddenly raised $90 million. And now iFlix had a lot more capital to expand. So I felt incredibly relieved that that happened. And just so the day that money came in, right? I remember 28th February 2017. Wow, like, after like surviving, like you don't know whether, will we ever pull it through, and finally the light appears at the end of the tunnel. And then 1st March 2017, you just have a random conversation with a friend about your purpose in life, right? And he gave me this Ikigai framework and guided me through it. And that's kind of how I kind of like, this reminds me of my conversation in San Francisco in 2015. I'm going to actually now commit to building it. Now's the time.
I mean, you really, really committed, because you've said before you went all in and you bet your kids' education, your life savings, everything into this idea of Naluri. Why? I mean, like, that's a huge bet at the, it's not as though you have just started your career, you already have kids and everything else.
Yeah, well, to me, I feel like if I'm not 100% convinced, there's no way I can convince anyone else. So I need to be like mentally all in. And mentally all in, there's theoretically, yeah, I'm convinced. But the only way you can truly convince yourself is, what are you going to put online to really back what you believe, right? And this is where I felt, okay, you know what? This is what I'm going to do. Like, just kind of figure out how much I've got in my different savings accounts and cobble this stuff together and just go, launch, commit.
So one of the unique things I read about Naluri is that it's more activity-based as opposed to results-oriented. Can you share a bit?
The other way around, results-oriented rather than it. Well, because again, I'm obsessed with problems, right? What are the problems that big companies are not solving right now? So when it comes to health, because of the experience of my father and learning about what Omada does, I realized that there's this category of health called chronic conditions. Chronic conditions are conditions like diabetes and heart diseases or cancer or mental health that you cannot solve with a single visit to the doctor. The way if you broke an arm or you had a flu, you can solve it. Those are called acute conditions, right? But the whole healthcare system was really designed for acute conditions. You make an appointment or you go to the hospital or clinic and you have a session with the doctor, and the doctor kind of gives you a prescription, then you go away. But chronic conditions cannot be solved with one-off consultations. So you need a different model of care. And the second thing you realize is that healthcare has been so specialized that every healthcare professional looks at your health only in tiny silos. The cardiologist only looks at your heart. The gastroenterologist only looks at your gut. The psychologist only looks at your mental health, or the dietitian only looks at what you eat. But when it comes to chronic conditions, they're deeply interrelated. And again, right, as now as I start to understand that, I realized that when my father died of diabetes and cancer, the journey was extremely challenging. You look back now, you realize, oh, depression and anxiety. And then you do your research and you realize that there are strong correlations between diabetes and depression, between anxiety and heart diseases. But as a healthcare system, we don't address them holistically. So there's a way of, let's say, well, there's an opportunity to do that. And the third, what frustrates people in the industry is healthcare expenditure is going up at double-digit rates every single year, but yet more people are getting sick. So something is not right? Like if you have to keep paying more for healthcare, but yet more people are getting sick. The reason for that is because it's based on activities. You are paying for a consultation, you're paying for a prescription, or even digital health. You're paying to track your steps or count your sleep or eat your calories. Those are activities. but they don't necessarily translate into actual health improvements. So we're like, imagine if we could figure out a way to change the economics to one where you're paid on success, only if someone gets healthy. And so that was why when we not only just look at the problem at a very high level of like, okay, well, a lot of Malaysians are unhealthy, but what specifically are the challenges? Why today's industry players are not addressing it? It's a bit like, okay, a lot of people want to go to Australia or London for a holiday, but why is it that many people can't? What about Emirates and Singapore Airlines and Cathay Pacific that excludes this big segment? Similarly to entertainment, right? What is it about today's satellite and cable companies that excludes millions and millions of people who don't have 100 ringgit a month for a subscription? So same thing with healthcare, right? Once you define the problem, then you can start to look at it in ways very differently from these big companies.
And you don't only break down the silo, you also ensure it's very localized. How important is that?
Very important, right? Because, just like we talked about football, right? English Premier League versus local Malaysian football, well, same thing, right? I mean, in California, when it comes to health, yoga, Fitbit, meditation, kale, quinoa, chia seeds, right? That's not going to work beyond Bangsa, Damansara, Mont Kiara, right? So you really need a much more localized solution to be able to connect, because health is about lifestyles and behaviors. And so you need to be relevant, not just from a language point of view, a culture point of view, to also understand local nuances, local insurance laws, local hospital systems. And they did differ very significantly. Indonesia's system is very different than Malaysia, very different than Thailand. So you've got to really commit to understanding it at a local micro level.
So what's very interesting is, as you've mentioned, you break down the silos and you have all kinds of people. It's not just dietitians or like gynecologists, you have financial planners, executive coach. And if you download Naluri app, they will ask you like, what's your goal? Lose weight. So how does it all come together? For instance, if I want to lose weight, how do all these many people end up helping me?
Sure. Well, so first of all, just because someone says they want to lose weight doesn't mean that's the main problem. Oftentimes people may not tell you, like maybe the main issue might be depression, but they might not tell you. They just want to say lose weight. But I'll give you one example, right? Today, if you eat very healthily and you exercise regularly, you may still gain a lot of weight. Why? Stress, right? Or lack of sleep, right? Because when we're under stress, the body's reaction to pressure from your boss or pressure from work or pressure from family is the same way the body reacts as if a lion is chasing you. That's how the body's biology is designed. And one of the ways that humans survived over millennia was whenever we were confronted with an enemy, we ran away, right? And we would run away for days, sometimes weeks. And so the body learned that, like that's the only way I can outsprint this lion. Like I just gotta like be able to keep running. We were natural marathon runners thousands of years ago. But what that meant was the body would say, okay, look, I may not have food for a few days. So how am I going to survive? I send signals to retain every fat cell, because fat is actually a very rich source of energy. So eat healthy and exercise, but if you're under stress, the body's deliberately holding your fat cells. So we have to get to the root cause of what's keeping you up at night and what's making you stressed. And a lot of times it's work related, which means the executive coach plays an important role for weight loss. The financial planner plays an important role for weight loss. Because if you're really worried about money, no amount of eating spinach and almonds are going to make you lose weight if you continue to hold a lot of that stress and pressure. So that's why I mean by we've got to look at it very holistically. Different people will have different pressures. And because healthcare is so siloed, a single individual can't help you. But the Naluri model is, imagine if I gave you a multidisciplinary team, and they're really a team because they work together and they're coordinated to help you at the center. And that's what we felt was different from what exists today out there in the market. So that's what we're trying to do.
I mean, digital health is still relatively new in this region. What was it like to start a company and have to educate people about the fact that digital health is important and life transforming?
Well, I mean, that's something I'm incredibly passionate about. Like I wouldn't do it if I looked at it as a chore or a task. Like it genuinely is something that I derive so much energy from. And it starts with me emulating the lifestyles. Because if I don't practice what I preach, no one's going to listen to me. So I have to be 100% convinced myself. And then I've got to be able to show people. People don't listen to what you tell them. They watch what you do. And ultimately, it's building these stories and just kind of convincing people one at a time, one organization at a time.
And is that why you produce so much content online as well? I mean, you have your own YouTube channel, you're active on Instagram. That's unusual for a busy CEO of a startup.
Well, maybe it is. But number one, actually, I did it because I just wanted to learn about digital marketing, right? Like, I'm a believer in you have to do to learn. You can't learn from a book or listen to a webinar. You've got to like get your hands dirty. So it started by just wanting to learn. What is digital marketing? What's social media? It's put yourself out there and learn from it. But over time, right, it actually became something that was useful for me. I benefited from it because it forced me to clarify my thoughts and put it in a 3-minute, 5-minute version so that people can get bite size. Putting one idea into only 3 to 5 minutes is hard, but it forces you to think and it sharpens your thought process, right? And so it benefits me. That's why I keep doing it.
So one of the big things that happened in your life happened in May 2018. Can you share with us what happened?
Wow. Okay. Well, you're talking about May 27th, 2018, 8:55 a.m. I was cycling in Kuala Lumpur and a car came from behind at very high speeds and hit me. And I woke up in the intensive care unit with fractured skull, bleeding in the brain, thorax 4, 5, 6, 7 fractured, 3 of my 4 limbs in a cast. Left eye, I think, narrowly went blind because it was like millimeters away from my iris. So yeah, that's what happened on that fateful morning.
I think a lot of people facing that kind of situation would want to give up, but you didn't do that. And in less than 6 months, you were running your Ironman. So what was it that spurred you on and exceeded any expectations people had for you?
Well, first, it wasn't like I'm naturally motivated or I'm different. I experienced the same darkness, the same bouts of depression, the same anxiety and panic attacks. But I'm fortunate because my co-founders in Naluri are psychologists and doctors. And the single message they help remind me is when we're faced with these crises and problems, if we just focus on the problem, it's never ending, right? Your head's just constantly spinning, thinking about the big problems that there is no answer to, certainly not lying on bed. So instead, they say, look, just focus on what are you going to act on? What are you going to do differently tomorrow? And in my case, it was like, okay, day number 7, learn to get off the bed and take my first few steps, 5 steps, and then walk 5 steps. Accomplishment. The next day, let's try 7 steps. The next day after that, let's try 10. And that's the whole idea is if I have something that I can focus on, that I'm acting on, that I can see progress, I focus on that and the mind briefly stops thinking about all the big problems. And so it's just like breaking it down to the smallest possible task each day and focusing on that. That got me eventually. So when you first start, you think, okay, 7 steps is hard. No way I can do an Ironman, right? Like you don't even imagine it. But if I thought like, oh my God, I'm supposed to do an Ironman in 6 months, I wouldn't have even bothered to start. But my expectation was just 5 steps the first day and 7 steps the next day, which means every day I just take 2 or 3 little steps a bit more, I'll eventually grow. It's like, people say if every day you just somehow become 1% better, in a year, you actually become 37 times better than when you started.
Do you feel like having gone through that experience that there's really nothing that can phase you now?
Oh, no, look, so I don't think I'm unfazed. I have a lot more anxieties. I still have a lot of problems. It's not that I don't experience that fear. I do. It's just at least I now have something to remind myself, okay, I don't know how to get out of this tight spot. What am I going to do today that will make a difference? Maybe it's just, okay, send out 1 email today. Let's see whether that makes a difference or not. Tomorrow, break it down. 1 more action, 1 more action, 1 more action. That's the formula. But the fear is still there. The fear doesn't go away.
And do you experience fear when COVID hit and you had to really rethink the way that you were operating Naluri?
Completely, right? I mean, we were fighting for survival, running out of cash. We stopped taking salaries because things were highly uncertain. Clients, all projects were put on hold, no revenues coming in. It was extremely scary.
I believe you recently closed another round of funding. What was it like fundraising before COVID and during COVID itself?
Well, I think fundraising anytime is hard because it's a lot of numbers. Like, remember 115 investors in iFlix, 115 rejections? No different here. So just because you went through that, like every time you got to go through the numbers. So you cannot let first 50 rejections hold you back. But remember from college days, right? I've got my wall of shame. Like one thing that I'm really experienced with is failure and rejection. So it gets better in that sense. Like, or it's not so much it gets easier, but your skin gets a bit thicker.
So when you began Naluri in 2017, you said that you gave yourself a self-imposed 5-year deadline to make it work. Has that changed? Like, how is it?
No, I don't. No, I don't think so. I think, well, what's interesting is next year is our 5th year.
Yeah.
I think we want to be able to, I think, really take it to the next level by next year.
So what's in the future for you?
Well, what I'm really obsessed about is, really transforming people's lives, right? Like if we can reverse diabetes and really help people live longer, even if they've got heart diseases or cancer. And very important for me is mental health. How do we make it front and center? How do we reduce suicide attempts and reduce burnouts and depression? That counts for anything else. More than the money, more than the size of the organization, it's how many lives can we truly positively affect?
And one final question before we wrap up.
Mhm.
You've mentioned before that you suffer from confirmation bias. So who are your mirrors?
Okay. Well, a few different points. I think number one, in my book, chapter 8, I talk about my mirrors, my personal board of directors, 7 of my peers who also run their own businesses. And we've been together for over 10 years, where we meet very regularly to share experiences. And it's because, number one, I have to actually talk about what I'm going through in a safe environment where I'm not judged. This is the challenge of being a CEO, right? Like, how do you truly open up to your problems, to your board and investors, to your colleagues, to your business partners? It's very hard. You have to always put up a front. So first is to have that safe space where you can truly open up. And second, because I have to explain it to people, it clarifies my thought process. And because it's done regularly, right? They listen to me, my progress or lack of progress, at least 8 times a year. There are trends, right? A lot of us think, oh, mentors, let me go talk to this one guy and get an idea. That is not mentorship. That's not very effective. Someone can't just give you impromptu advice. But if you stick with it, you build a relationship and they understand the context, the journey, and they're also sharing similar experiences. That's where I think the power of what I call mirrors kicks in, right? So that's, I think, my number one mirror. I think my other mirrors for sure are my own kids, because they look at the world very differently. They're a completely different generation, so just kind of hearing them and watching and observing them and seeing how they tackle things differently, that for me is another source of a mirror for me, right? Is to look at life through their lens and not through mine.
That point you mentioned just now about having other CEO group people always giving you that advice.
I never give advice. We share experiences and we decide on our own, what do we take? What are we going to learn from other people? Because they're just telling their story. But the moment I tell you what to do, you don't have ownership of that idea. Oh, well, I'm doing it because someone told me to do it. So that's why I'm not a believer in seeking or giving advice. But I'm a big believer in creating a safe space for people to just open up and communicate.
Do you have any advice for people seeking to create that safe space and finding that circle of people that you could trust to share the most vulnerable parts?
Well, I think more and more organizations realize the power of this format. So, another organization is called Entrepreneurs Organization. They've got a very similar format. Women with Lean In Circles, very similar format. Other organizations, H2, I think a lot more startup founder organizations are creating these spaces. But you don't have to join one of these organizations. It's a lot easier because it's been structured. But figure out who are the 4 or 5 people that you think you want to learn from and you think that they can learn from each other, and invite them to a group. And if you want to know what are the mechanics, how do we do it, get my book and read chapter 8. Point by point, this is how it gets done.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Azran, for your time. It's been such a pleasure. I normally end all of my interviews with this. So the first question is this: do you feel like you have found your why?
Yes, I do. I think just for me, defining the ikigai, what started off as Naluri, because the intersection of what I do well, sort of starting businesses, defining the problem, rallying people around a vision, what I personally am passionate about, human performance, endurance, like Ironman is about the mind giving up first before the body. So if you can override your mind, your body can do so many more amazing things that you thought possible. Our mind is our biggest limiter. And third, it's the impact to society, because today over 1 billion people don't have proper healthcare, right? In Malaysia, 9 out of 10 people who need mental health care support are not getting mental health care support. In states like Sarawak, there are only about 2 or 3 qualified clinical psychologists, right? If you go to a government hospital, your wait list may be 9 months. So can we use digital to kind of really democratize access to good mental health care and good chronic disease management? I think we can. And that's why, to me, like, this is something I'm really, really passionate about. And it is my why.
What kind of legacy do you want to leave behind?
To me, if there is one, it is human longevity. Longevity is a choice. Aging doesn't have to be inevitable, because it starts with us as humans believing in ourselves that we can actually significantly improve our mental, our physical, our emotional, our spiritual lives. We can constantly find new technologies with precision medicine, with CRISPR, gene editing, with a lot of new sensors that are coming out. We can actually win the battle against aging-related diseases. But it starts with a belief that, for us as humans, going past 100 should be the norm, not something like, wow, right? That person is approaching 100. That's out of average, right? It needs to be the norm. And I think it can. So if I can do my part in moving us towards believing in human potential and human longevity, that would be the best legacy I can think of.
What do you think are the most important qualities of a successful person?
I think a successful person is basically someone who feels comfortable where they are right now, rather than constantly thinking, I need to be somewhere else. So that means you're doing what you love. You're doing what you feel purposeful. You are making an impact today. So success is being comfortable with what you're doing now, and not like, oh, if only I have this, or I have that, or I'm doing this, or I'm doing that. That for me is success.
And where can people go to follow you, support what you're doing, and follow your Ironman experience?
Well, for now, of course, all Ironman races are on hold, so I don't have a lot to share that. But otherwise, I'm on social media, probably most active on LinkedIn or AzranOsman-Rani.com. Information on my book is available there. Or if not, you can always download the Naluri app, and I'm also available on it to just chat.